on the community and convenings team. My sort of day job is to curate the annual School World Forum that usually happens in Oxford each year. It was not to be this year for reasons we all understand, but we are all getting used to meeting this way on video and audio, and hopefully continuing to sort of push some very important agendas forward in spite of these challenges. So just a few pieces of housekeeping as we dive into this Catalyst 2030 session. We are recording this conversation and we'll use that to sort of glean learnings and ultimately post this publicly on YouTube. So if you do not want to be recorded, you can see yourself out. Please feel free to use the chat throughout the session, which is on the bottom right of your Zoom screen. These recordings will be posted on the Catalyst 2030, the Catalyzing Change website, and we'll tell you where shortly after the session, and Facebook as well. And then there will be a forum to gather your insights shortly after the session as well. So with that, I'd love to explain sort of why we're here and do that with some partners. You all have been invited to participate in this because of your own expertise in this topic and issue, and we really appreciate your time today. This is a session on economic opportunity and livelihoods, and ultimately we are hoping to glean some insights and learn about some innovations and collaborations that are really critical to the success of this issue area, and will be presented to the high-level political forum in a little over a month. So before we dive into the topic today and hear from the great speakers that we have to frame the discussion, I'd love to turn it over to Neelam to share a little bit more about Catalyst 2030, as she's been very involved in the initiative since the beginning. And I know some of us are new, so I will turn it over now to Neelam. Thank you. Oh, you can unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much. And thanks all the wonderful panelists we have with us and all the thought leaders who've joined to add value to whatever we are going to propose. Okay, so Catalyst 2030 is a unique movement of Schwab, social entrepreneurs, Skoll, Ashoka, as well as Echoing Green. And I think it's got a very charismatic group of people and driven by Jeru Bilumoria, from whom I'm learning a lot on a daily basis. What is very unique about it for me, because when it started, as usual, one says movements, I mean, what's it going to be? But since its inception last September and its official launch in the World Economic Forum in Davos in January, I have been closely involved, and I'm I'm so impressed by the kind of bottoms up energy it has. Bottoms is a wrong word because our social entrepreneurs are not the bottom, but it's really a movement of its members, and the way it is managed and the way it is run. It is very, very inspirational and has given me hope that other collaborative movements could run the same way. And that's about, and therefore the whole aim of the Catalyzing Change session ideas actually evolved from some of the social entrepreneurs. And Jeru has then taken it and helped form it up with Skoll, with Ashoka, with Echoing Green, and with Schwab Foundation to become something very wholesome and something which could move towards giving a final set of recommendations to the high-level political forum, which is a predecessor to the UN General Assembly week. Yeah. I hope that's fine, an introduction.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so today we really intend for the majority of this to be a collaborative discussion among all of the experts that are here with us. But just to get a sense of who is in the room, if everybody could use the chat and introduce themselves to the larger group. So your name, where you are in the world, your organization, and one word about how you're feeling today. So I'll go ahead and kick us off. Hopeful, energized, feeling great. It's nice to have some positive energy. I think I'm particularly excited to talk about something that is not entirely focused on COVID-19 today, although I know that it is a backdrop for all of our work and sort of experiences right now. And, you know, want to, of course, honor what we are all going through, and at the same time, excited to talk about, you know, how we can perhaps use this as what I've heard others call a portal moment, an opportunity to use this time to step into something new and ultimately an economy that serves more people and the planet. So with that, we can see everybody who's coming today from all over the world. Super exciting. So we've set up these roundtables, this being one of many taking place this week with Catalyst 2030 and the Catalyze Change campaign, based on issues that emerged from the first round of the campaign. And our hope with this session is that we will identify proven solutions, which are scalable locally, nationally, and globally. These solutions should be replicable, so that they can be shared with governments and policymakers and sort of have wide appeal in that sense, and ultimately result in policy recommendations to expedite social change, especially in this COVID-19 recovery period. So we have 4 speakers who will very briefly share a bit about an innovation that they are engaged with on this issue that sort of mirrors the pieces that I just said. So they're going to share their shovel-ready collaborative solutions, and ultimately have about 3 minutes each to share that, and then we'll talk about what some of the challenges are and ultimately the barriers that need to be removed in order to create scale and sort of a wide adoption of these kinds of innovations. So 3 minutes, speakers will put up my little, let's see, do I have that? Yes, my clapping hand, which means that you need to wrap it up. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna get started with Eve. So Eve, you've got 3 minutes to share your shovel-ready innovation, and we'll hear from others before diving into a collaborative breakout discussion after these 4 speakers set us up. So Eve, over to you. You can unmute.
Sorry. Thank you, Jessica. I'm Yves Moury. I'm the founder and CEO of Fondation Capital. Fondation Capital is basically trying to address what we call economic citizenship at scale and globally. What we understand by economic citizenship is allowing the base of the pyramid, to speak quickly, but particularly extreme poor and poor people, get access to the kind of services that we all take for granted, access to information, to financial services, to training sources, to capital sources, to hopefully a basic, and it's the right moment to speak about that, a basic social protection floor and that kind of thing. It's a long time, probably more than 8 years ago, that we realized that if you want to go to scale, and that's what we want to do, we want systems change, we want to address systems and not symptom. The way to do it at scale is based on, for us, 3 pillars. The first one is working with governments, because governments and public policies, by the way, are massive by definition. Second one is allowing poor people get access to markets. Markets allow huge opportunities for poor when rightly addressed. And the third one, and the most important for us, is all things digital, or most things digital. That is, we realize that most of the services that we want the poor to use can be at least partly, not completely, but partly be given in a digital way. As we all know, more and more poor people do have phones, maybe feature phones, but most, maybe none, but they might have, you know, a SIM card that they share in a community. And a lot of them do have smartphones, more and more, bad quality ones, but false hand ones, stolen ones, I don't care, but they've got them. So what we do is, the 2 key words here is access and services, and massively distributed. So since more than 8 years, we do develop digital tools. We started with circulating tablet computers in communities with community leaders. Now we still work on tablets, but we basically work with smartphones. All the digital services that we provide are more and more bespoke, or at least personalized as much as possible. We work with, and we invest a lot. We invest a lot in machine learning, data mining, data analytics, etc. to do that. We work with partners. We love partners, by the way, so welcome those willing to work with us. High tech, high touch was our previous motto. No, it's still high tech and probably lower touch for obvious COVID-19 reasons. And I think my 3 minutes are over, isn't it? Yeah. I would love to speak for 2 hours, but I can't.
I know you can, Yves, but we'll hear more from you in a moment. Thank you. So Neelam, we're going to go to you now and hear a bit about the innovation that you're working on.
Yeah, so some similarities with what Yves spoke about, but basically I'm going to just point the lens on regenerative economy because I feel that with the 4 million underserved in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, will need to be pulled out of poverty. And how is economic growth going to happen for them? If we take the China route, the planet is pretty much doomed. If we keep growing these consumptive economies, we are past the point of no return. Therefore, let's relook at how these economies are going to grow. How are all the youth going to get jobs? And therefore, we talk about farm occupations, off-farm value addition, and stuff around what we call creative manufacturing, or it's MSME, it's small manufacturing for the food, fashion, and home industries, right? So around that, India has about 200 million artisans. And of course, it's got the world's largest population of smallholder farmers. And the whole principle of our work has been around building co-ops or collectives or producer-owned companies to achieve scale. And around this thought, we've worked on an idea called the Platform for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. So this is a societal platform. One of India's leading thought leaders has come up with the idea of platforms that should be owned by society and not privately owned. And you can always visit www.societalplatform.org, and hopefully they would have updated their website and would be talking about the 5-6 societal platforms they believe should come up. So PI, Platform for Inclusive Entrepreneurship, is one of those. And it's built around a bottoms-up practitioner methodology called the 6C ecosystem, right? So which is, we talk about doing the 6 C's digitally. So the first C is construct, which is aggregation of small producers. And this is all distributed manufacturing. People do not have to migrate to cities for work with all the contingent issues as we see in India today. Millions of migrant workers are struggling to get home. So you do distributed manufacturing in rural areas, which is state of the art, high quality. It will feed into all the global supply chains possible. It's called construct. It's aggregation and professional services. Capacity is all the training, hard, soft, all kinds of training. Our third C is create, which is design or value addition. So on PI, we could have 1,000 designers sitting, giving their services, or food value add people sitting, like a chef from Bombay who wants to make a unique pasta sauce could be reaching out to a farm collective directly on the platform, a tomato farm collective. Yeah. So it's all about value addition and laddering up these producers. Our fourth C is channel, market access, right? So one of our most successful collectives supplies 100,000 baskets of a kind to IKEA, right? And we just had a call with IKEA today requesting for home-based work. So 2,000 women could work from home making these baskets. And the technology and all the apps will help them do it. And our fifth C is capital. Yeah, and our sixth C is connect, which is the digital connectivity or the platform on which this all sits. And my time is up.
Thank you, everybody, for being so on time. Okay, and next we're going to hear from Njideka. Oh, you're on mute.
Great, thank you. It's really great to hear both from Yves and Neelam. And I am with an organization called Youth for Technology Foundation. We are an international education technology nonprofit. And I know, talking about regenerative economies in the kind of work that we do at Youth for Technology Foundation, it's hard to talk about, the new economy without talking about the current pandemic. Indeed, we know that, pandemics exacerbate inequalities. And in the work that we've done in the area of education and entrepreneurship over the last 2 decades, we've basically had to, pivot over the last 3 to 4 months around what the future of education looks like, especially in these developing countries that we work in. And so our work has involved almost not just an education solution necessarily, but really a cultural shift in mind change. Working with teachers, working with ministries of education that, no one had in their plan designing education for pandemics. We know that the COVID-19 situation, of course, has exacerbated that inequality. And that inequality, mostly in our work, is faced by women and girls living through this. If we take the Ebola crisis as a similar example, a couple of years ago, we know that that crisis left over 10 million girls out of school even after the pandemic. And so it's really, really imperative for us as an education nonprofit to ensure that girls and women particularly continue to remain engaged in the education spectrum. And there are a couple of ways that we're doing this. For one thing, we are working across the board with teachers, teaching them not just to prepare their curriculum for the fourth industrial revolution, but really teaching them how to revolutionize their material, their training curriculum and their material outside the four walls of the classroom, to include not just teaching the hard skills that young people, especially girls, have to learn, but also the soft skills and more of the 21st century skills to withstand a lot of these pandemic shocks, as we will call them. Because at the end of the day, we have seen that there's been a tremendous amount of job loss, but though men and women have both lost their jobs in the employment market, for instance, women are further left behind because their jobs cannot easily be translated into work-at-home jobs, jobs in industries such as hospitality, leisure, social services. And so we have had to basically equip our teachers with the mindset and equip them with the curriculum to be able to transform their content to incorporate not just the hard technical skills, but also the soft skills for them to be able to translate in this new economy. We also know that there are 3 areas that we need to focus on, and we're doing that as we build out our curriculum with the teachers. The first is that we need to ensure that women and girls have equal representation in our entire response planning and decision making. Evidence across sectors, including evidence across economic planning and emergency responses, and that they demonstrate that their curriculum integrates these policies that help women and girls to transform into what the post-COVID situation will look like. Secondly, we are driving transformative change in equality by addressing really the care economy. We know that a lot of these girls that we work with, a reason why they may not return to school after the pandemic is because they are responsible for their family members and their well-being. And so ensuring that they continue to remain active so that they return to school is an imperative for us. And then finally, we're targeting women and girls specifically in our efforts to address the social economic impact, to apply really a gender lens to the curriculum as the teachers revise their curriculum to ensure that women and girls are not left behind.
Thank you, Angelica. Okay, and finally, we're going to hear from Steve Waddell.
Thanks so much. I think it's appropriate I come after all of these great examples to share with you some things that we've been working on. The general concept here is bouncing beyond. So people have been speaking to this. It's about how can we move with the opportunities that COVID presents to really move into the old, move away from the old economy and what people refer to as bouncing back, to bounce beyond into our aspired and possible future. So we note that here we see lots of action that has already been mentioned. We know there's lots of action that's happening. So we've decided to focus upon new economies as the key framework because we see that people at this time have in front of them, many people, the question about how to gain their livelihoods. That does not mean that we're not interested in the SDGs or the climate change. They're all, of course, very tightly connected to the way we think of the new economy. But by giving it an economic and livelihood framework, we think that this will be make it most relevant to people coming out of COVID-19. So we've been carrying on consultations with many people about what we're wanting to do. So it's about emerging the new economies and providing an infrastructure to help propel them and support them into an ongoing series of virtual cycles of activity. So as we've said, a lot of this activity is already happening, but it's not yet connected. It's fragmented between many different frameworks. These are just a few of them, many different initiatives. Eve mentioned the importance of systems thinking, and it's certain permeated Catalyst 2030. We talk about the need for transformation systems, that is bringing together, connecting. It's not about coordinating, it's about connecting and developing powerful transformation systems in which we are all embedded. We're all part of a transformation systems. And certainly that's what the SDG Transformations Forum focuses on, the entity that I work with. So we feel that in general, we're at this moment that can be referred to as the chasm moment. We all represent a lot of innovators and early adopters, but our challenge in COVID-19 is to cross the chasm to really engage the early majority. The characteristics of innovators and early adopters will not carry them into the early majority. The early adopters and innovators are generally charismatic, very determined, highly driven by their values, etc. And the early majority is much more cautious. They're interested, they realize that something's got to change very profoundly, but they want to know more about how it's going to change and how they can actually do it. They're wanting to have someone point to a system rather than them having to take this huge chance. So it's about how do we move across this chasm? And we feel there's two key questions to address. One is build the collective understanding of how we interact as a whole and how we create coherence of effort and infrastructure to be able to really move into this new economy. So one of the projects, the Global Assessment for New Economies, is 4 months. It's been funded by the UK Research Council. We have not had yet the confirmation, but we're very optimistic about it. It will be a 4-month engagement of up to 1,000 people around the world who are deeply developed, engaged in new economy development. These are some of the people. You can see that Giroux is one of the advisors. We feel that this community has a lot to offer. They are very senior people in the development of the new economy world. So we think it will be of a quality similar to the climate report that comes out from the IPCC, but it will be made up of but the reporters, the 1,000 people, will not just be scientists, they will also be practitioners to come up with very practical knowledge and next steps, and they will identify what to do next. So how to give life, rather than thinking that the policymaker is going to simply follow through with all of these great recommendations. The bouncing beyond is to give life to these recommendations, to bring out more recommendations at a very local level. It's about creating a global conversation and a global action to be able to do this over a period of 18 months, a very specific project period. I see my time's up, so I'll just speed forward. But we are talking about, right now, we're developing 4 different cases as part of our proposal for gaining some funding. If you're interested in this, I'm very interested in talking with you, and you can get me at swaddell@transformationsforum.net. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So thank you to all of our speakers for just putting out onto the table some of the many exciting innovations and initiatives and collaborative opportunities for us early adopters, I suppose, to try to move things forward. I think a couple of things really stuck out to me. One was that, of course, a crisis like the one that we're in exacerbates existing inequities, and so we need to both address those existing inequities and the deepening of those inequities at the same time as we are trying to move forward and sort of use this as an opportunity for the world that may be beyond. So I wanted to go back quickly to each of our speakers and just sort of understand, this will set the table for the breakout sessions. You know, these are really exciting initiatives and opportunities that you all have been working on for quite some time. And so just sort of wondering what is in the way of scale, essentially, what is in the way of widespread adoption of this solution that you've been working on for years and years. And if you had to make one policy or financing recommendation for how we can actually move things forward and clear the path for success, what would that look like? So we're just going to have a minute or two each here. Eve, would you like to go first? And unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jessica. There are so many obstacles, of course, so I could list 20, but habits would be the first one. When I'm talking to a lot of colleagues and people in our so-called development world, what I see is a lot of people willing to do more of the same because they are accustomed, because it's what has been done since World War II. And without changes, by the way. I mean, fashion movement from time to time, but like microcredit and no impact investment and missing middle, and you know. But basically, we do development the same way as we do it since 80 years with no changes. So habits, I mean, repeating more of the same is probably the worst, the more complicated obstacle, because it's in our minds. I include myself, so it's in all our minds. You're on mute, Jessica.
Thank you. Now it's me. Do we have any sense? How do you change habits?
I mean, you know, there is a word I hate deeply in our work, and that's the word pilot projects or pilots. But I feel that we are obliged, unfortunately, to start with pilots, to convince people precisely, and convincing governments. A few words about governments, by the way. It's normal that policymakers and politicians don't want to take risks with public money in particular. That's normal. I mean, I would do the same. So it's necessary for us to take risk for governments and prove the concepts to them through pilots. And then if it works, they might say, oh, then we can go it. No, we can do it without any political risk or financial risk. This is it. It's the same for governments or big businesses. We work with multinationals. We work with we work with banks, and it's just the same for everybody. I mean, prove me you're right. And then the other key word is, okay, what you do is probably good in X countries, but our is different. Ha ha ha. I mean, we are all humans, by the way. I mean, it's not that different. Culture is different, of course, but.
Great, thank you. Neelam, are you still with us?
Yes.
There you are.
Yes, I'm my finger on the mute button. Like,
yes.
Please join us. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So to be frank, we've got 1.4 million farmers in India on Pi. Right. In the first dry run of Pi in January, I think $7 million was transacted on the platform, and the collective made a stupendous profit of some $200,000. Yeah, which is 1.5 crores, right? Farmer income went up by 70%, right? Fine, that's proven to some extent. The off-farm piece, because Pi is all about farm stack and off-farm stack. Off-farm stack, we are trying to build energy into it, because historically India has been very, very weak on aggregations in the off-farm stack. And we've just started a new movement called Creative Dignity. There are a lot of Creative Dignity people here, hopefully, yeah, which is a movement of volunteers, because we've never had the funding to onboard like 1.4 million artisans onto the off-farm stack, because farm is a well-known issue in the world. You go to any global funder, there's farm, farm, farm. Off-farm is never thought about, right? I mean, and you can't even call the sector artisanal manufacturing. It's MSME manufacturing. It feeds the largest consumption markets in the world: fashion, food, home, right? So it's also a question of all the issues that the sector has, that the sector wants to call it handmade, sector wants to call it crafts. No, this is about the lives and livelihoods and inclusive growth of the nation. So this is a problem with people within the sector, from outside the sector, and it can only be solved collaboratively. It's not going to be solved by one charismatic person. It's not going to happen, right? And once you've proven, like I think Farm Stack is pretty much proven. We've got Raghu here. He'll be in one of the breakout rooms who's been anchoring Farm Stack, and he can share more with you. But the off-farm stack has still a little way to go. And I do believe there are 3 state governments in India who are already using Pi for farm, right? But not in its full portfolio. They're just doing 1 or 2 of the Cs. They're not doing all 6 Cs, but it's a good beginning, right? And we're really hopeful through Catalyst 2030, actually, that we have the Minister of MSME, Nitin Gadkari, in the next fireside chat, which follows up after this on June 18th. And we really unfold this whole story to him and about the whole thing. And let's see how that evolves. So we're very, very optimistic about always influencing the Indian government. But in the meanwhile, it's got to be about philanthropy and donors supporting the model till the government's really cotton onto it in its holism. They're doing it in pieces, but not in its holistic way. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm hearing from both of you the need for someone, likely private philanthropy, to fill the gap between government adoption, widespread adoption, and sort of the risk that exists before that. So, and Judeka, does that resonate with you, or do you have another policy recommendation that would help you scale? Take yourself off mute first, thanks. You're muted.
I mean, absolutely, I would agree with that commentary there. I would also add that in some of the countries where education has been impacted, there's a skills level, right? So there are varied levels of skills, for instance, that teachers teachers have across these different countries, whether it's, you know, the developed world where schools were able to very quickly transition online versus, you know, pockets of rural development where some schools were even further behind. And then when you come to the developing world, you know, when pandemics like COVID hit, education stops completely. And so the different levels that the teachers have, the educators have to bring them up to speed and then their students up to speed has, you know, has an impact on the ability to scale. I think the private sector has a role to play in those instances as well, really partnering the education community with the private sector. Also, you know, in the instance of data and data access, in the US, for instance, 21% of households still don't have broadband access. When you go to Africa, only a third of girls and women have access to mobile phones, right? And over 50% of the continent is still without access to data. So access to the internet should be fundamentally a basic human right. It should be affordable and accessible to every single person on the planet. And these are ways that, you know, government intervention and private sector intervention can help curb the risks associated with pandemics that affect education, quality, and access.
Thank you. Okay, Steve, and I know you're sort of at the beginning of an 18-month process here, but what have you experienced or do you anticipate to be the sort of barriers and challenges to this systemic approach?
Well, our theory of change points very clearly to 6 key challenges, and those have arisen from talking with lots of transformation entrepreneurs and looking at lots of transformation projects. So I've just put it in the chat there, but these are deep challenges that inhibit getting to scale and inhibit our general ability to transform, and they're so powerful that they require some sort of collective action. So one of them, for example, is around governance. We know that in most parts of the world, the governance process, and certainly in the United States, is basically broken. The connection between policymakers and citizens is very broken. There's all types of intervening interests that make it broken. And this is a key problem. So transformation entrepreneur says, yes, well, it'd be good to have better policy, but we put lots of energy into that better policy, but it doesn't happen because the governance process itself is broken. So it's that type of issue. And that requires a broad collective activity. So what we're urging is that we create this very grounded local discussion about, number one, where are we going? What's happening in our communities already, because there's already a lot happening to be able to bring about transformation, and to look at it broadly about how we collectively are transforming our community to be able to gain those sorts of issues of scale vis-a-vis these very deep embedded changes. That really requires, again, moving from the individual entrepreneur model into a systems change model. And that's usually a big challenge. So that's what we hope this can help emerge, the bounce beyond efforts.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's exciting to see so many social entrepreneurs participating in Catalyst 2030 in this conversation. We at the School Foundation feel it bodes well for collective action and ultimately, more networked collective approach to solving problems. So with that, it's time for us to actually break out and have some smaller discussions. So thank you to our speakers who have set out just a few of the opportunities out there, as well as some of the challenges that I think are pretty common across the board. And so now we're going to try to solve them in 25 minutes. But really have an opportunity to surface some of the other approaches, maybe some of the opportunities for collaboration between them, and ultimately identify what some of those challenges are that we can bring forward to the high-level political forum in a document that is being developed. So we'll go ahead and put some discussion prompts out. Each group, use the time as you wish. These are opportunities or suggestions for how to lead your conversation. And I think the Catalyst 2030 team is going to be able to publish them in a broadcast, but we're going to send you to smaller groups now. Please introduce yourself as you get started on video, if you can, with who you are, where you're from, and the organization that you're with very briefly, and then really just use it as an opportunity to connect and discuss. So we have 20 minutes. And I think we're gonna go ahead. It may look like you're dropping out of Zoom very briefly. Just go ahead and check the join breakout button, and we'll see you there. And we'll come back to discuss the insights that we've gained in about 20-25 minutes. Maybe some technical difficulties. Let's see. Rangel, are you there?
Yeah, I've put the breakout rooms already, so if people could just accept to.
How to accept?
Yeah, has anybody seen theirs?
No.
No, I don't know that they went through. We can just do random rooms, perhaps. There we go.
Good.
Thank you.
we can change very, very fast, like a movement, right?
Absolutely. Yes, Jack.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because right now I'm working with Jose Mari, and then we have this cooperative model. Of course, Jose Mari believe also don't use the cooperative structure, but use the cooperative spirit, right? And that's what you are doing. And I'm getting Anand and Arthur Wood for finance, and this Frederick for measurement, and then we have to think about how everybody can start learning from each other. And once we are able to do that, I think the exponential growth will be amazing. As long as we don't hold whatever we have to ourselves, we just let it go and share, because there are 4 billion people who needs this, and maybe so far, maybe 500 million have been reached, and the rest don't enjoy all this knowledge. And there are 4,000 business models, and some are lots of them are silos. So
Yeah.
if
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, which is why these are all public good platforms, right? And the whole issue with platforms are they're ghost towns. So they don't get populate until people co-create and collaborate. So it's all about how we co-create and collaborate together. And I'm sure it's going to happen. And now we have to hand over to Jessica. Because
okay. Jessica.
We can continue. I think this is generally the spirit of what's next, which is let's share sort of what was exciting from each of the groups. What were the common challenges, and ultimately, more importantly, recommendations coming out of your discussions. So it looks like we lost some folks at the turn of the hour. So I'm just going to, I think, keep this relatively organic. If you have something to share from your group, yeah, go right ahead, Steve.
I think that the thing that excited the group was the idea that we all have very significant numbers of people in our networks. Neelam, you have apparently 30,000 artisans in your network, and Jack has a large number of people in his network. And that to move to the systems perspective is about us sharing those networks, and it was suggested doing some sort of needs assessment or what they would be interested in buying, so that if your artisans need toilets, then how do we make the connection there? And doing that across all of the, well, there would probably some geographic orientation, all the social entrepreneurs in the region. And that's what I think excited people was the idea then of being able to do this just with the qualities and the ethics that you're integrating into a traceability, transparency, etc.
Thank you.
I think the spirit of Catalyst changes everything, and we have to keep thinking about other people. Yeah. And once we have that, all your customer, Neelam, all your people who earn money, we will use the poverty stoplight survey from Foundation Paraguay Martin Berg. And then after they have done their survey, they will know what is the priority of their expenditure and how much do they need to send their children to school or to build an extra room for their son's marriage or whatever. And also what not to spend, like, festivals and snacks and alcohol and buying lottery in the hope of winning. So all those things, they will start to figure out, and then they can do on enterprises to earn more money. And then these enterprises would require the import for everybody's model. So for example, Martin Berg, I visited him 3 times in Paraguay. He don't have enough enterprises model. So he would need to grow that by copying everybody else, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Since I know Jack really well, if anyone else wants to speak, you have to speak. Otherwise, Jack.
Yeah, I think we're hearing that the solutions are here, right? And how do we unlock and sort of move some of those solutions to the places where they're needed, and ultimately how do we remove the barriers and bring in the funding? necessary to do that. Was there another group that had any exciting, I'm sure every group had exciting insights. Does anybody want to share something that came out of your group? You can just do jazz hands.
Yeah, I might probably,
go ahead.
yeah, sorry. I might probably go on about what I said in the group. So I would rather if either, I don't know, who's there, Carol, who's with the group. Would you want to weigh in on that, Carol? Okay,
she's there. Away. Carol is on mute, yeah.
Yeah, I know, but she's probably away from the desk or something. Mark, what about you?
No, she's unmuted. You'd like to speak, Carol, please?
No, I'm fine. I mean, yes, what do we, weighing in on our group or on what, yes. I have to say, I'm really excited. We didn't talk about this in our group, but just that idea of toilets, with Jack's network, excuse me, combining with the network of the artisans, that is really amazing to go ahead and pitch for funding when you have like a ready market of like all these people. And that I haven't really thought of that before. I love that idea. But in our group, we were talking a lot about power structures. We were talking about how things have become so globalized versus localized, and that COVID has really brought out the risks of having everything coming from a different place. So maybe now is the unique moment in time to show the value of more localized supply, chains and efficiencies of where things should be, maybe more decentralized versus, centralized, if you just look at Amazon as an example. So that's a couple things we threw around.
Yeah. Okay, I guess let me weigh in on that. A lot of what I spoke about, I guess, is in line with what Neelam and Jacob are doing, I guess, because we're pretty much in the same space. The idea of the means of production not being in the control of the producer, and how do we redistribute that, how to change the focus from return on capital to return on labor. Now, that is the challenge. And anything like that requires patient capital, which then you would need a change in the lens of policymakers themselves. And my opinion is that, like Neelam calls it creative manufacturing, I call it indigenous industry. The idea that the small producer communities that used to be the backbone of at least the Indian economy are without that power now. And despite the fact that 50% of employment is generated in this off-farm sector, so to speak, how do we bring focus back onto that? Only when it becomes apparent that there is a short-term return and a long-term return. The long-term return is obvious that if you aggregate the currently disaggregated production norms in these distributed producer communities, it would make a whole lot of sense, yes. But for that, the initial change that needs to happen requires that patient capital, and we simply don't have that patient capital. At least I don't think, unless Neelam has some kind of magic wand that she can share with us.
Yeah, I mean, no, I do believe once you start showing some success, things start happening. So things have started happening in terms of that capital front, and a lot of new innovative financing models are being worked upon. So we are, of course, eternally optimistic. Our group, I would like to share what Andreas Papp had shared with us. Am I pronouncing your surname right, Andreas? I may not be. Yeah. Okay, I'm okay. Yeah, so I think he brought out a kind of a new paradigm about how he believes that the youth and the young people across all underserved communities are the ones with most talent and have the best ideas for change. And how do you, in this day and age, connect them with so many people in Europe, etc., I mean, he's from Austria, and he said, everybody wants to do something. Yeah. So how do you create a kind of a platform where you build networks between the underserved and the people who have the ability? So anyway, that was an interesting platform idea that emerged. Yeah. So I'll stop about our group now. And any other group would like to share?
I think Judika may have, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just add to that, of course, you know, your point about, you know, young people having talent. Absolutely. I mean, talent is relative, but it's the opportunity that's not, right? And our ability to be able to provide that opportunity, irrespective of where that young person was born. You know, in a lot of our work and in a lot of our focus on education, and a lot of where we see, you know, primarily a lot of the private sector type funding going to right now is in the urban and or peri-urban communities. But how about the young people and the children growing up in rural and informal settlements, right? During this pandemic, how do they get the education or stay up with the education that they need? So, I mean, in terms of policy reform, one thing is that, you know, we need to be very intentional, or policymakers need to be very intentional, especially when working with girls and women in these areas, to ensure that they design, you know, stimulus packages and social assistance programs to achieve gender equality in education and social protection. And also in these policies that they include and consult girls and children that live in these rural and informal settlements. They consult them and include them in their decision-making processes so that they are as effective as they need them to do for those particular environments.
Thank you. Deepa, do you want to share? I feel like the earlier discussion about the role of patient capital was something that we talked about in our group as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we looked at the role of the private sector, but we also looked at the different types of capital and where the need is and where it's appropriate for the different types. We talked about traditional investors and the hesitation to invest in the long term, but convergent to that is the fact that actually the impact investing space is big, and going from the philanthropic to the more formal types of financial products. And rather than thinking about it from we need to access capital, actually looking at it from a solutions and a problem-based approach, rather than individuals looking for accessing capital, but how do you create systems that get funded rather than individual projects? And is that a way to look at it as an alternative? And a bit more nuanced way of distribution of resources.
Absolutely, Deepa. And I think laddering, I think the jump from philanthropy to impact is it's too big a jump. There's a lot of laddering in between that is getting missed. And I think you're right. I think in the paper that we do, the 2-pager, a good 3/4 of one page should be around the capital, because that's, I think, the crux. I think the solutions are there, right? But
and I think it's about shifting the mindset away from problem-based approach. I think one of the talk earlier about pilots, I think is deeply problematic because it's reductive. Frankly, I think actually originally pilots were there to test and to promote learning, but actually it's been seen as we do that first and then we roll out, which isn't the point. The point is to be able to look at systems and to look at what and the testing of ideas, but actually it's broader than that. And I think it's what goes where, rather than let's pilot something. And I think it's a shift in the way that funders look at these things as much as it is about delivery agents elevating the game.
Eve, do you want to respond to that? I think you were saying the same thing, essentially, which is that pilots have become this expected first step rather than something that is actually iterative and a learning opportunity.
There's tomorrow I'm leading a session on changing funding. And the big game is around systems funding. And it's speaking to exactly what you're talking to, Deepa. So it's moving away from, it's not about impact investing, right? It's a different dimension of investing. So it comes in many different ways of looking at it. It requires new structures, and those are new products and new ways of investing. But the key is that you're paying attention to the investment, your investment impact in terms of a system.
Yeah.
So, for example, one person that we've been working with has brought together and created 12 very different but connected investment opportunities. And he said, if you invest in all of them, you're creating the necessary system that's going to really flourish. If you invest in just one or two or three of them, that system isn't going to flourish. You have to understand the whole range of investments that are necessary. I really like the way you're talking about this.
Eve, you're on mute. Eve, you're on mute.
Sorry, a quick comment, and I will try to be short if you allow me, Jessica. Okay, when we speak about pilots, it's the usual word I hate. Deepa, I understand your concern. I agree. In fact, behind this, the key issue is, how do we understand what end users, client users, underserved, excluded families think and appreciate the kind of services that we do? For years and years and years, I'm old enough to say that, for 40 years, I've been listening to a lot of actors saying, we do participatory approaches. We've got focus groups. This is, may I use a bad word? Please stop recording. This is bullshit. It doesn't work like that. I mean, if we want the real, true, unintermediated opinion of poor people, they need to be able to speak directly, and sometimes without being recognized, about what they feel and believe and what's their true opinion about the services that we propose to them. And again, the solution here is digital. I mean, digital tools allow poor people with a phone to press a red button or a green button. I dislike this, I like that. And we've been doing that in many, many cases. For just, if you allow me 30 seconds, just as an example, we've been banking and financially including a lot of poor women, extreme poor women, and in Latin America, indigenous women in particular. And we realized that even with an open bank account, they couldn't enter the bank agency because the guy at the entrance would tell them, this is not for you, go to the ATM, because they are dressed differently, etc. So what I did, I gave them dumb phones to something like 10,000 of those poor women, and they had to press a button. Are you well received or badly received? And then we transformed this information into a map, changing all the time. And I put that map on a big screen in the board room of that precise bank. So they would see where, in what agency, my customers are badly treated. This is the way to go. Direct information from the poor. We like it, we don't like it. And then we can stop speaking about pilot projects and that kind of thing.
So, hi. This is Nagar. Can I add one comment on what Steve was mentioning on funding? So this is something we are struggling in India as well, right? Because we have only three forms today: grant, debt, and equity. We seem to be playing around with these things wherever possible. So where grant starts with your philanthropy, then impact investments comes with your equity. So there is nothing in the middle, right? So we've been debating, I think there is a few articles I've written, I'll forward you in Forbes. So last year, the Indian government was looking at, one of the suggestions I was making is about social business exchange, right? Where we are saying that let's define what a social business is, and the investor who invests, the consumer who buys from them, and also the entrepreneur who's willing to start is going to get SOPs, right? Government benefits. And this exchange will attract people who understand what a patient capital is, because we've been using the word that impact investing has been hijacked the last 10 years, right? So the mainstream started coming in offering 18% IRR in a social businesses, which is impossible even in the mainstream. So I would be happy, Jessica, if you could arrange about the innovations in funding, right? Hundreds of years, zero innovation except the crowdfunding. So I'm sure people in the sector, I'm sure that a lot of you are veterans in this, probably we have to brainstorm. And can we come out with some ideas about how do we bring capital, and which is also maybe bring in patient capital with the correct expectation for what people are going to get. I know there are social bonds where there in the UK, only one entity tried in India, did not work, right? So I'll be happy to, I'll be breaking my head on this topic. I'll be happy to probably participate, learn if you guys organize some session around that. Yeah.
Thank you, Naga.
Hi, this is Juru. Sorry.
Hi, Juru.
Hi. I've been listening and jumping through lots of sessions, but hi. Can I just say one thing? Because when I was listening to Yves, I really agree. We talk about inclusive economies, regenerative economies, and financing, but can we put the client at the center and really ask them whether all these financing structures and everything that we are talking about is really necessary? So maybe we need to shift our development paradigm to ask the clients first what they would need, what would help them, and how could we best serve them. So I think maybe, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to only listen in, but I could not help but say this because I was listening to all of these other theoretical things, and to me, the client is the center, and somewhere I didn't hear that. So sorry about that.
No, thank you. And I want to, we're at time, and thank you, Drew. That was actually, I think, one of the clear common themes across the discussions was the importance of putting the poor, the workers, the client at the center, I think, of what we do. And the other main theme that I heard was a need for some innovations, or at least more widely adopted innovations on the way that funding is done. And so that we can have a more systemic approach, whether that's funding across an entire ecosystem, or maybe more collaborative funding where different funders are agreeing on different parts of that ecosystem that need to be funded in order to take it forward. So we're at time. I'm going to push one more time. There's a Google Doc. I don't know if folks could reach it the first time. So if you took notes, please put it in the Google Doc that I'm putting here in chat. Any notes from your conversations, so that we can take this forward. I think Neelam and her team is going to take the role of helping to construct this document that will go into the larger Catalyst 2030 document to go to the high-level political forum. So thank you all. Thank you for participating. Thank you especially to the speakers who helped us set the stage today. This is the beginning, or maybe the middle, of a much larger conversation that's ongoing with Catalyst 2030 under Juru's leadership. So thank you all for participating, and we'll continue in these times from our homes to try to push the agenda forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great week all.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.